Okay, so I recently saw a video on the internet, and while I thought it was interesting and thought-provoking, and I'm always willing to give different ideas and perspectives a try, and there were parts of this video that had value, I also thought there was a lot of context missing that I really wanted to share here. And so today will be a reaction video. Now, I will just preface this by saying I didn't watch the whole video. I watched the first 10 or 15 minutes, and that is specifically what I'm commenting on and discussing, not the entire video. And we're gonna dive right in.
What does a therapeutic worldview consist of? What does that mean?
Like seeing problems in your life, kind of pathologizing problems and experiences as something medical, rather than I'm just experiencing this emotion or kind of age-old anxiety. Now it's become a medical issue. So things like talking in the language of attachment styles and trauma, and losing the language of just ordinary hurt and disappointment and things like that.
So this video starts off and it talks a little bit about how therapy has essentially replaced religion or become the modern day religion, and discusses how you essentially have the comfort of something and faith in something without having to do the work that often religious views require. And I just wanted to start by unpacking this really briefly. So when they are speaking into this, I personally see this as being the subgroup of people who go to therapy as a means of identifying with the labels that they have. And if you've been following this channel for a while, you know one of the first things we talk about is the subconscious mind, and how our anxious attachment style or dismissive attachment style or fearful avoidant, all of these things are the result of conditioning, right? Attachment theory is literally the science and psychology of how your relationships with your caregivers growing up conditions your adult romantic relationships, and really adult all relationships, because it actually teaches you, fires and wires into your subconscious mind, what you come to expect, what your habits are, what your needs are, how you give and receive love. It's your conditioning. And if you are somebody who goes in to do the work on your attachment style, and your work is just to find out about your attachment style and the attachment style of other people around you, then yes, that could have a point. Her point could have a point where you do get some sort of comfort and faith in something. You're like, oh, I have the comfort of understanding. I have the comfort of context. I get to recognize that this is my attachment style. And that's why I react this way. That's why I call so many times, or that's why I stonewall. And so if you're doing that, sure. But the biggest piece of work that we're supposed to do with this information is not stop there. The biggest piece of work that we talk about so much on this channel specifically is how to recondition your attachment style to actually become earn secure, to actually become securely attached. And so a label is actually a healthy thing at the beginning, right? It's a healthy identifier. It adds context. And for anybody who's ever struggled with anxiety, one of the biggest things you see about people who have panic attacks is as soon as they start to get anxious, if they don't have context for what's causing them to feel anxious, they panic more. And if they can start identifying their triggers, for example, oh, I'm anxious because I'm running late to work and I know my boss gives me a hard time, that actually diminishes their anxiety in that moment because they have context for why they're experiencing what they're doing. But that's not supposed to be the only thing. It's not just supposed to be that you get that comfort and faith of like, okay, now I know why I have anxiety. No, you're supposed to start the work at that moment. So that first step is the awareness piece, that label, for example, in your anxious attachment style or dismissive avoidant, or recognizing somebody else's attachment style is about their patterns and has to do with them and not about you, for example, not being good enough or not worthy. All of those things give context, and context helps us take things less personally. Context reduces anxiety. It does give a certain degree of comfort and safety, but that is not where things end. And I want to just say here for a second, like if you've been following this channel, you know that our conscious mind is responsible for 3 to 5% of all of our beliefs, thoughts, emotions, and actions, while our subconscious mind is 95 to 97%. And so what we're meant to do is then recondition our anxious patterns or dismissive avoidant patterns or fearful avoidant patterns. And as an example, one of the first ways that we do this is if you're an anxious attachment style, hey, you probably grew up people pleasing all the time, not learning to meet your own needs. And it takes about 21 days to fire and wire new neural pathways that are strong enough that are likely to stick. And so we start with things like, okay, 21 days of learning to meet your own needs as an anxious attachment style, identifying your needs, starting to figure out what those things are, and building those healthy habits within yourself through repetition and emotion to create that new wiring. So now you know how to self-soothe, right? So if we just say, oh, I'm an anxious attachment style, that's why I do these things, that's why I call too much, that's why I feel anxious, and we just use that label and identify ourselves that way, then we're doing it wrong. But if we're like, hey, that means that I have a hard time self-soothing. Let me begin to rehabituate my ability to self-soothe. Let me fire and wire new neural pathways over and over again. Now we're doing the work. Now we're actually doing something incredible with this information.
There's the girls that are in therapy, which is a lot, but then there's also the girls who are just like living in therapy culture. So it's just they scroll through Instagram and it's all about attachment styles, trauma. They go on TikTok and it's like a trauma-informed therapist telling them like red flags they should watch out for and stuff. It's just like...
So I want to be mindful that there's parts of this that I do agree with. Like, for example, if you're somebody who literally spends all day on social media just obsessing addictively over these things, that becomes problematic. As human beings, we want to have balance across all 7 areas of our lives. So you want to make sure you're doing things like going outside, having physical activities, spending time with community or friends. I mean, of course, we don't want to just be sitting there scrolling all day, but I think that if we are spending time educating ourselves about patterns of human behavior, so we know how to better communicate, we know red flags to look out for, we can have better boundaries as a result. I mean, that is a heck of a lot better than just spending all day doing things like watching cat videos. And so I actually like that there is this sort of infiltration into social media of people gaining access to tools for free if they can't afford therapy. I mean, I actually think that's a huge blessing. But of course, if there's a point in time where you're literally just only doing that, or you're finding yourself addictively obsessing over these things at the expense of having a relationship to the other areas of your life, like your career, organizing your relationship to your money and budgeting, learning about other topics, making sure that you're in a position where you have physical health habits, making sure that you have time for friends or family members, making sure that you've got the spiritual aspect of your life that's involved. I mean, if we're only looking at the emotional area of life, sure, that's a problem. But I don't think that that is a fair representation of what most people are doing if they're educating themselves. And actually, that's a heck of a lot better than just spending time watching movies all day or watching cat videos.
There is a time for therapizing.
Yes.
And then there is a time to not, in the same way as going to the gym. There is a time to train, and then there is a time to recover.
And this is something I do agree with. Like, if you are spending endless hours, and I'll actually speak as somebody who did this, I mean, personal growth and tools and learning saved my life. Like, they were absolutely transformational personally for all of my relationships. Like, I can't get behind personal development enough. But when you've done enough work on yourself, it's also okay to unplug. I went from somebody who probably spent 2 hours a day, whether it was meditation, sometimes even longer at the beginning of my own healing journey, hours a day in meditation or, reading, learning, watching YouTube videos, taking certification courses, journaling. I mean, I spent hours a day. And that was something I really needed at the time because I had a lot of attachment trauma growing up. I had a lot of confusion, and I actually had a lot of healing to do. And that was amazing for me. I mean, that was the most life-changing thing I've ever done. But as you start to heal, it's important to also make sure that you just don't lean on that as a crutch, right? For me, I'm somebody who went from spending hours and hours a day to once I realized, like, I don't really get triggered very often anymore. It's pretty easy for me to communicate. I'm really good at self-soothing. My nervous system is regulated. Once I had those cornerstones of, what a securely attached person would have in place, I'm somebody who just made it a habit. So just like Chris is saying in this video, there's a time to train and there's a time to rest. And for me, I'm somebody who I still meditate in the morning and briefly in the evening. And I journal 6 days a week. And I will journal for half an hour. I'll do something like read from A Course in Miracles and journal about how this applies to my life or what I can learn. And I do that for 20, 30 minutes. I make time for that in the evening because I know personally that when I'm doing that, I constantly feel at my best. Just like for other people, maybe going to the gym 6 days a week is a thing. I'm also in a relationship to these things that if I miss a day or I'm really tired and I want to go to bed earlier or I have to get up early and I miss a meditation, I'm not going to beat myself up for that. It's not this like addiction or this crutch. It's this, hey, I know these habits make me feel the best. I'm going to make them habituated. I don't need to be doing this like eat, live, breathing this, although that was useful for me at one point in time. And instead, I just know that there's a certain degree of upkeep, just like it's not healthy to go to the gym, get to your healthiest, fittest version of yourself and then be like, okay, I reached my goal. Now I'm just going to go and eat donuts and sit on the couch all day, right? No, you want to have some sort of healthy sustainability that's there in a way that allows you to feel at your best. And that set point will be different for everybody. And that's something that I think is really meaningful to check in with yourself. Like, when do I feel my best? With what habits when it comes to personal development and the emotional area of life, but also looking at that across other areas of life, like your physical health and well-being, how you sleep, how you eat. I mean, all these different things, but that balance is key. Now, Chris goes on to essentially say that if the online your environment that you're in is permanently or constantly having these patterns reinforced, then that becomes a problem. And I do agree with this. Again, I think that this is actually an important point of this dialogue and of this conversation. If you are somebody who's going, okay, I'm anxiously attached, and that's why I, move so quickly in relationships, that's why I have such a hard time self-soothing, but then you're not doing the work to actually vet people in relationships better, to learn how to self-soothe so you don't feel this need to move too quickly, then you're not doing the underlying work. You're just attaching and identifying with the label. And yes, that can actually cause you to feel like this is just a form of control. But if instead you use the label as something to unpack what's going on, that is so much better. And there's a point in this video as well where Freya says we're not able to just have an emotion anymore. And this is something I think is so meaningful to unpack as well. Emotions are not random. Okay, when you're feeling an emotion, it is feedback. It is feedback almost always for one of two things. Number one, you have an unmet need. So for example, let's say that you're sitting at work and you feel frustrated at work every day because you go out of your way and you over deliver at work and you're not getting paid enough for how hard you're trying, how long you've been there, how much you're showing up. Your unmet need may be to have a raise or a promotion. But if you just sit there and you don't unpack, oh, this is why I feel frustrated at work every day, my emotional guidance system is actually giving me this feedback. Let me go do something about it. Let me go ask for a raise. Let me go communicate that I think I'm deserving of a promotion. Or if I'm not getting those things and there's no room for growth, let me look at maybe a 3-month exit plan or strategy to move to a different company that will honor my skills and talents and how hard I work or how much I show up. I mean, emotions are feedback, right? So a lot of times emotions, we're not just supposed to have an emotion and sit in it. We're not supposed to be like, okay, I just have this emotion. No, we're supposed to recognize it and sit with it briefly from a somatic point of view, but then ask, what is this emotion telling me? Why am I feeling this way? How can I course correct for the root cause here? And that's where we actually get to grow endlessly. That's where we constantly use our emotions to navigate our lives in a healthier and more effective way. And the other reason that we can have negative emotions is because we love to tell ourselves negative stories. We might have somebody not call us back. And let's say you're anxiously attached and that happens. And then you start going, oh, it's because I'm not good enough. It's because I'm not lovable. Well, if you're telling yourself that story, of course you're going to feel terrible. And so the other reason or way that we can start using our emotions is like, hold on. Am I telling myself painful things? Do I need to course correct the way that I'm thinking or perceiving the situation? Or even better, use a tool like we have in PDS called auto-suggestion to rewire these core beliefs. So you stop falling into those rabbit holes of thinking of yourself that way just because it was your conditioning and the way you learned to perceive yourself growing up. Just because you were conditioned that way doesn't mean that that is the objective truth. And so there's a way to rewire these things once and for all. And that's where, again, this idea that no, you're just supposed to have an emotion and just let it be. No, you're supposed to build a relationship to your emotions. You're supposed to observe what emotional feedback is and sit with it, of course, at first briefly to be like, okay, what's coming up for me? And to get familiar with it. And then try to course correct for the underlying reason you're feeling that way. And that's how you feel better. And so this idea that we're just supposed to stay unconscious of our emotions, not pay attention, just, be okay with feeling bad all the time. I mean, that's simply not correct.
So if you look at these kind of attachment style forums or girls talking about their attachment styles, very often they'll describe just a bad relationship and then they'll say, oh, it's my attachment disorder. So they'll be like, he cheated on me and I can't get over it because of my anxious attachment. And it's like, it's so sad.
So here's another really important point. And I think that if, this was studied a little bit more and there was an understanding of attachment patterns, one of the first things that you will see is that if you are somebody, for example, who's anxiously attached, we love to pick our subconscious comfort zone. What does that mean? It means that we tend to be most comfortable and most familiar with people who treat us the way we treat ourselves. And what that actually looks like is if you are somebody who constantly dismisses yourself because you're so busy people pleasing everybody else, constantly puts yourself down, constantly, is critical of yourself, feels like you're not good enough, then when you meet somebody who's dismissive and critical, consciously, you're going to sit there and go, oh, this isn't healthy. This isn't good. Subconsciously, because literally your subconscious is running your life. It is all of your conditioning. It is 95+% of your life, your beliefs, your emotions, your thoughts, your decisions. You're going to go, oh, this is comfortable. It's familiar. So let me go invest in this person. And we often feel the butterflies for people who are just familiar. And what is most familiar is how we treat ourselves. And this is why learning your attachment style and actually becoming earn secure is so important, because unless you're actually looking at why do I keep picking these people? What are my patterns that I'm choosing in others that I'm first enacting in the relationship to myself, and course correct for that, do the underlying work. And what that means is, okay, I have to be able to sit down and say, if I'm dismissing myself, let me take action on a daily basis to start listening to my feelings and needs. Let me start actually having boundaries in my life. Let me stand up for what's important to me. Let me actually communicate my needs to others and invest in relationships where I'm receiving from other people as much as I'm giving to them. Unless we do that underlying work, then you're going to keep picking people from that same place of comfort, from a familiarity. And so that's where, again, yes, if you just look at attachment style forums and you just identify yourself as a certain attachment style and just attach to that label, it is problematic. But if you're somebody instead who can sit there and go, okay, I'm an anxious attachment style, what can I do about it? Or I'm a dismissive avoidant, what do I do about it? And work on reconditioning the underlying patterns that create that attachment style to begin with. Your attachment style is not fixed. You are not born with it. It is literally your conditioning, and conditioning can be rewired at any time with the right tools. And that's where, learning, hey, actually, this is the language. Let me learn that I'm anxiously attached. Let me learn what that entails. Let me course correct for that, can be one of the best gifts you ever give to yourself. So while I see this dynamic that they're having this conversation and they're saying, if you just identify with the label, then that's problematic. And I agree with that. If you're not doing the underlying work, then yes, it's limiting. Then you've only come halfway on the journey. And I get that, right? You only identified with the label. You only had the awareness piece. And then if you use that label to justify the same actions and the same behaviors over and over again in your life, you actually are reduced to a label. But if instead you take that information and you course correct and you're like, okay, this label tells me my patterns that are not working. Let me actually show up and start working through these patterns so I can have better patterns. I can do the work to recondition and change my life. That will forever be one of the greatest gifts you give to yourself. If you're somebody who's truly interested in helping others while also securing financial freedom for your future, there is a limited time option to join our 50% off certified relationship coach program. And this is a 12-week program where you can create financial freedom, work from anywhere in the world, and truly make an impact on other individuals' lives by becoming a certified relationship coach in just 12 weeks. Throughout this entire 12 weeks, you will learn all of the tools that you need to discover somebody's attachment style and help them heal and change their attachment style if they are insecurely attached, so that they can become secure and build the best relationships of their life. On top of that, you'll learn all about the subconscious mind and how to actually rewire our painful limiting beliefs, our painful behavioral patterns, and help your clients learn their relationship needs, as well as the needs of their loved ones. You'll also learn how to build a thriving coaching practice and set yourself up for long-term success. You'll learn all of the business tips and tools you need to build funnels, leverage marketing strategies, and really thrive in the marketplace. Even if you have absolutely no coaching experience, this certification will give you everything you need starting from scratch to become a thriving relationship coach. You can find more using the link down below. So I thought this was really important to comment on, just because, while there were tiny parts that I thought were meaningful and interesting, I also thought that there was just this sort of summary of attachment styles being depicted in a way that is very limiting and actually just isn't enough well-researched in terms of the tools that really are there for people to heal, for people to change. And I wanted to make sure that there was this perspective for anybody who's curious or wondering. So that's it for today. Thank you so much for watching and for stopping by. If you enjoyed this video, please like, share, and subscribe. And I look forward to seeing you in future daily videos.